And all right. Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim Valeri here. Sort of an impromptu sort of interview today. I am fortunate that we have Vinnie Cappetta with us today. Now, for those of you who don't know, Vinnie and I go back a long way. He and I met a while ago because we literally do therapy in the same town. And Vinnie has taken it upon himself to be sort of this specialist, this expert in grief. And so I kind of did a thing on grief a week and a half ago, and I feel like I totally bombed it. So I've got Vinnie here with me today because he knows his stuff. He actually has a grief group. He has tools and tips and ideas about how to help people with grief. Vinnie, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. What's going on? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm just thrilled to be here with you and to talk about something, unfortunately, I know about from life experience. So I'm excited to be able to share some of the things I've learned so that pain doesn't get wasted.
Exactly. All right, let's dive right in. We got a couple of questions for Vinnie today. And one of them was one of the ones that a friend of mine brought to me. And, he's a very close friend of mine. And he sort of said, hey, man, how do you support a spouse that's going through grief? And I'm like, wow, it's a pretty deep question. And even when I did my video a couple of weeks ago, my wife was like, man, you're just not touching it, man. You're not going deep enough. There's got to be more there. I'm like, you know what, you're right. So I'm going to ask you this question since you're the expert on this. How do you support a spouse that's going through grief?
One of the first things I thought of when you asked me that question was that we need to be in the present moment. And so I'm going to ask you and your audience to throw out neutral times. Throw out the neutral times. You're just sitting around doing nothing. But when you're actually outside those neutral times, how much is your brain working for you, and how much is your brain working against you? Or we could say it this way: how often are you in the present moment? So put a percentage to that. How much you think that you're in the present moment? You don't have to tell me, but just put it in your mind. Most of the people that I ask or that I assess show up somewhere in the 40 to 60 range. So they're in the present moment between 40 and 60% of the time. When I took the assessment, I was only in the present moment 55% of the time. So you can see by just looking at that there's a huge gap and a huge improvement that I could improve in being more in the present moment. So thinking about this thing about grief, if my spouse is grieving and my spouse has gone mostly through physical pain, particularly in her pregnancies, 3 of them, she has hyperemesis. So she loses weight instead of gains weight. She gets very sick. She can't hold down food and everything. And I remember having a really difficult time being in those present moments with her. I just wanted to stick myself in my office and get away from the pain as much as I could. But so what I had to learn was to be able to move toward the pain. And to be able to do that, you need to be in the present moment. A lot of the people I work with are Christians, so I like to talk to them about the idea that our body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. So it's really, it turns out our bodies are really important to being in the present moment. So there's some strategies here. When I'm talking to my wife and she's in pain, I'm going to look into her eyes, not just because I want her to know that I love her and that I'm there with her, but for my sake too, because that helps me be in the present moment. I'm going to look at the eye color. I'm going to look at how her eyes are different than anyone else's. I'm going to listen to her voice. I'm going to listen to the tone, the timbre, the pacing of her words. Not just because I want her to know that I care about her because I want that, but also because it's going to help me be in that present moment with her. Simple things like watching her body language. Normally she'd be lying on the couch at that moment, right? So I'm watching her and I'm watching how she's dealing with the pain and how much it's affecting her. And as I watch her body movements, that visual cue is helping me be in the present moment with her. And then, of course, touch, I think, is really important, particularly with grief. And I'm going to hug her. I'm going to hold her hand. And while I'm doing that, I'm really going to feel what it's like to, touch the ridges on her fingertips. What it's like when I hold her. What that sweater feels like, right? And all that's just going to help me be in that present moment with her. So there's something really cool about our brains that someone's called the self-command muscle. So whenever we're doing one of these things and we're just focused, like right now, like I'm looking into your eyes, right? And it's helping me be in this present moment, right? I could focus on your hair or I could focus on your back wall. It doesn't matter. It seems like that would actually be distracting, but trust me, I'm going to ask your audience to try this because It's going to help them zone in more to the person in front of them. And that's really important with grief. So when you do these things, you're building up what's called a self-command muscle in your brain. And that muscle helps you be more in control of your thoughts and feelings and all that, which is really important when you're with someone in grief, because if you're not in control of what you're going to say stupid things that we've all heard people say to us in our own grief. We say dumb things to people. It's because we're not in the present moment with them. And so when you're doing these things that I just talked about, it's going to be easier to notice anything that's going to get in the way of you and that person working through the grief together, for that person to be able to work through. So that's my first big idea, is you've got to be in the present moment, which means you can't be in your head like, what is the right thing to say right now? You have to be just present in your body, embodying your body.
Yeah, I would almost argue that, what's the right thing to say? Nothing. Just kind of be there.
Yes.
It kind of, if what I'm hearing you're saying here, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is be there, present in the moment, and kind of take in the experience. Take in
Yes.
the touch, the scent, like the whole sensory experience of being with that person and helping them through what's going on. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely. We have an example of this in the Bible with Job. His friends come to him in his grief, and they just sit with him for 7 days. And in the whole book of Job, I think that's the best part of the book, is when they're just being quiet with him and just helping. They're just with him in his grief. And it kind of goes downhill from there whenever they start talking. So, yeah.
Yeah, it ends up not going very well. They're cool for a little while. It's like, well, maybe you blew it here. Maybe you screwed up. And you just need to go and recognize where you screwed up, which if you didn't. And that's the ironic part about that story. So cool. No, that's phenomenal. That's fantastic stuff. I love it. And that's good, because I think a lot of times, someone once said, the most powerful gift you can give somebody is your attention. Yeah. And in this day and age, where everything, we're trying to get people's attention right now, right? Hey, come watch this thing. Everyone's vying for our attention. And I think in this sort of circumstance where being able to go and say, hey, you know what, giving this person your attention, giving this person your undivided attention, put the phone down, turn it off if you have to, and just be there present with them when they're experiencing this, and this also kind of, I think, involves some level of communication as well, and sort of understanding when that person needs that. You have to be able to communicate effectively to know if that person needs you right now in that moment, because if they don't, if you're unaware of that, if you're not, tuned into where they are, and you don't know that they need you to listen to them in the moment, you're not going to be able to be there. So there's another piece to this as well. It sounds like that you have to be aware of that.
Yeah. The second thing I would say to your audience is that there are things that are going to get in the way of this process. And I'll just simply call them saboteurs for the moment, because you and I are going to likely sabotage this situation. And this is one of the reasons that it's hard to be in the moment, is because we get in our own heads. And research shows us there's actually 10 saboteurs that can get us. I'll just talk about 3 of my own for your audience. The first one's the judge. I judge myself. Am I doing good right now in this interview? Am I doing good with my wife who's grieving? Am I doing a good job? And I'm judging myself. When I'm doing that, I'm in my head, which means I can't be in my body, which means I can't really be present with my wife. So that's the judge. I'm judging myself. Maybe sometimes I'm judging her, why is she letting this get to her this way? Why is it unfolding this way? Or maybe I'm thinking about her doctor. Why hasn't her doctor come up with the right medication? All this, and I'm judging people now. And then also I judge circumstances. This is a terrible thing that my wife has to go through these pregnancies like this. This is bad. These circumstances are bad. And then I've done this before, where I actually judge God and say, God, you don't know what you're doing. Why would you allow these kinds of things to happen? So the judge is a character that can really and all of us have this judge. Now, the other ones, I don't know if you have these or not. You'll have to take my assessment to figure out. But another saboteur that I have is the avoider saboteur. And what happens is I got introduced to grief at a young age. My parents divorced when I was young. I lost my mother and my stepfather before my 11th birthday. So I'm good at avoiding feelings. I'm good at avoiding grief. I'm good at avoiding the emotions that come with it. I'm good at avoiding the conversations because this is what people taught me when I was growing up. You don't talk about these things. These are unmentionables, right? So again, when my wife was sick, I wanted to hide in my office because it was difficult for me to have those conversations because I wasn't used to it. I built up this super skill of avoiding things as a young person, and it served me well. It helped me survive those first 18 years. But now I'm not a kid anymore. And I have this woman who I'm in a one flesh union with. I love her and I want to be there for her. And so this avoider saboteur can get in my way. The other saboteur that I've noticed for myself is what's called the stickler saboteur. And this is where I'm actually critical of others. And the way that this can play out is that I can be critical of how someone else is grieving. Like, you're not doing it right. Like, if you would just do it this way, like, this is the right way to grieve and this is the wrong way to grieve. This is the wrong way to go through pain. This is the right way. And so also, I'm going to hold myself to an impossible standard as a stickler. I'm going to be measuring, again, how well am I doing in this conversation? And so I'm going to get upset if I am not doing it right. I have this belief that if I could only do things perfect, then my life would be happy. If I could only avoid certain things, my life would be happy. But these are lies. And so there are 8 more of them. If you're interested, I've got an assessment for your listeners that they can take. It'll show them exactly what is likely to get in their way of being present in the present moment with someone who's grieving. So you can drop the link into the chat at some point. That's checkyourcompass.org/sabotage.
Yeah. Those links should be in the comments there. No problem whatsoever. And I think it's good. I think it's good to have that because it's good to be able to identify those things and put a name on it, so that there's an element of like, hey, you know what, these are parts of me that I'm not crazy about. And so I'm a big fan of self-improvement, big fan of trying to improve the situation, in our lives so that we have a better marriage. And so just being able to identify like, wow, I'm really judgmental of myself. Wow, I maybe have a stickler for some of these things. Like I kind of, I have these areas that I am not, they're not great. And these are areas I got to work on, so it's one thing to identify these things. I think the next step is really kind of working so that either A, identify this as part of my personality and say, hey, you know what, this is just part of who I am. And I need to work within that framework of my existence, or I don't like this part of myself. And I'm going to go ahead and make a change and so that I'm not as judgmental about myself. And I really like that concept of the judge, because that's a lot of negative self-talk. It's that sort of that constant sort of component of it.
Yeah. And what I'd love to do for our listeners today, I'd love if they'll take that assessment. I will give them a free coaching session. If they want to work on something grief related, like they're trying to be there for someone who's grieving or they're grieving, I'll give them a free coaching session, because the reason is when I get that assessment and they get the assessment, it's just going to speed up our process. I can get a lot done with them. I already will know a lot about what's getting in their way, and I can speedily help them. Either there's something that they want to, something that's getting in their way, or something they want to move forward in their life, grief related or not. I'll give them a free coaching session if they take the assessment and then contact me within 2 weeks. I'd love to do that for them.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. Awesome. Cool. I appreciate you offering that to people here. The other question I had for you is, what are some coping strategies for grief that we can touch on? I think we kind of, sort of dipped our toe in this a little bit here, but it sounds like that you probably have some ideas on how to manage grief if you're going through it, or, if other people are going through it. What are some strategies people can use?
I've read so many books about grief and loss, just for my PhD and other, just for myself. One of the things that someone said that has stuck out with me above everything is that grief is about love and remembrance. Let that settle in for a moment. Grief is about love and remembrance. So all the other emotions that we would think are negative, is probably a good idea to take our hand off the hot stove of those emotions, like anger and anxiety and all these things, because they're going to burn us. And the reason they're going to burn us is because of those saboteurs. Whenever I'm feeling one of those negative emotions, it almost always comes from one of those saboteurs that's placing some kind of lie in my mind about the situation. But grief is different. And the reason grief is different is because grief, when we sit with it and work through it, it's going to take us to a better place eventually. when we work through the grief. So I would say ruthlessly eliminate anything that isn't about love and remembrance. Okay. So the saboteur assessment I mentioned earlier comes in handy because it's going to help you identify what thoughts don't belong with that grief, with that love and remembrance. I'll give you a simple example of my dog. My dog died, and I was really upset about it. And I began to realize that part of what was happening was I was blaming myself for what happened to the dog, but it wasn't my fault, right? And so in this love and remembrance, something got stuck in there that isn't love and remembrance, and that was blame and shame about something I did or didn't do that may have caused his death. So this is really, I find this is really important for all the people that I work with in their grief. Most, like 99% of the time they get stuck in their grief is because it's one of those saboteur lies that has wiggled its way into the love and remembrance. So I'll say to people, are you loving and remembering? They say yes. And I'll say, okay, are there any lies involved there? Is there anything getting in the way of that? And if they say no, I'd say keep on that track of love and remembrance. You're going to get through this. You're going to get to the station of hope. You're going to get to that train station of hope someday. You're going to get to that train station of peace someday. Keep on that love and remembrance track. And so that's one of the things that I'll bring up. Also, I think empathy is really one of the very first things that's really important strategy for grief. And that is, I need to be empathetic with myself. When I'm sitting with someone who's grieving, that's not an easy job. And that's why maybe Job's friends didn't say anything for 7 days, because, hey, what do you say to somebody who's lost everything? So
could be worse.
Yeah, that's what people would say, right? So what I like to think is I need to be empathetic myself. I'm in a tight situation here. I'm with somebody and I have no idea what to say. I need to have empathy for myself. I need to realize that this is a tough situation. But what also helped me is to also empathize for that person in front of me. So one easy way to do this is to envision that person and a picture of them at a younger age, even like a child. Because sometimes when people are grieving, they have behaviors and they have saboteurs. And so sometimes we're presented with some rawness, we're presented with some of their behaviors that we don't like. So what can really help us in that moment is to envision what they were like before grief and loss, what they were like when they were a child, before life really started messing with them. That's going to help give us some empathy for them so that we can put ourselves in their shoes. And of course, we want to love a child, a 5-year-old child, a 10-year-old child. We want to love them unconditionally. So that's my aim when I'm working with an adult who's grieving, even if they're doing or saying difficult things. I had someone the other day who was in a counseling session. They just walked out of the counseling session, because they were upset, right? And I want to be able to love that person. So the other thing I would say is that we need to explore the love and remembrance. Okay, so I have a Facebook group where this is what we do. We explore love and remembrance. We explore this kind of thing. Also, there are other support groups, places people could go to really explore these things. But also journaling. Journaling is a great way to just write down your thoughts and explore what are all the factors around why this is so upsetting to me that I've lost this person in my life. How did I love them, and how do I want to remember them? And then I would also say that, I want to come up, how are some ways that we could walk through this together? So we can ask the person, if it's our spouse, how can we walk through this together? What are the best ways for me to help you with this? What do you think you need in this situation? Yeah. It's kind of looking outside the normal ways that we handle things and being a little bit innovative and thinking outside the box of ways that we might be able to work through this, because let's face it, grief kind of is outside the box of a lot of our normal experience. And then I often think about strategies. I will ask myself, think about my future self, think about myself older and wiser Vinnie, with the wisdom that God will give me in my later years. What will I wish I had done in this situation? As my older, wiser self. And God usually gives me wisdom for that older, wiser self to be able to give to my now self. Okay, here's how I want to be in this situation. As I grieve or as I grieve with this person, this is the kind of person I want to become. So I need to do right now the things that will help me become that kind of person. And then the last thing is sometimes we just need some action steps. Like if you're grieving, maybe you need to go talk to a pastor. Maybe you need to see a counselor. Maybe you need to write out your thoughts. And rituals are huge. You probably see this with people who come to visit with you in the counseling sessions. Visiting the graveside can be an important part of the process for some people. Looking through pictures of their loved one, spreading the person's ashes if they've been cremated. Sometimes there are like very practical things that we could do that might help in that ritual phase to help us move forward with our grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's like, I wish I told people to bust out a notebook and a pen because there's a lot there. I wanted to throw one more question at you, and this is one that we hadn't talked about, but I'm just going to ask you anyway. What do you think about the grieving process? Because the grieving process in psychology and therapy has sort of changed over time, right? There was like 5 stages of grief, and now there's like, I don't know, like 20 stages of grief or something dumb like that. Like it's kind of expanded. So like, give me your take on the stages of grief, and how does that, like, are any of them practical? Do you buy into that at all? Or do you feel like, we're overcomplicating grief? Like, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts about that.
So the stages of grief really were designed or seen in people who were dying, not people who had already died and we're grieving the person we've lost. What they found was this was the stages that people went through as they approached death. So it's different than typically the way that we use it today. I think most people experience some of those 5 stages of grief, but not in a linear way. So one of the things that people often find helpful is when I break out this picture, and it's a big ball of spaghetti, and each piece of the spaghetti has an emotion on it. So you have anger and guilt and shame and sadness, and there's like hundreds of emotions written all over these strands of spaghetti. And grief can often feel like that, where you just have so many emotions. And sometimes part of this process is just picking out, one of those pieces of spaghetti and figuring out, what is this? What am I feeling here? And untangling that mess of emotions that is grief. And that's why I mentioned the saboteurs and the lies earlier, because most of that stuff that's in that ball of spaghetti is being generated by our saboteurs, the sabotaging thoughts. If only this, then my life would be this.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that in the mess of grief a lot of times. So pulling those strands out can really make it a lot easier to deal with what's actually there in front of us, which is we love this person and we're trying to remember them. Or maybe, some of us have people that we're grieving the loss of, but we're grieving the loss of who they weren't. Like they weren't a good father. They weren't a good mother. They weren't a good brother. They, that kind of thing. They weren't a good child. And so we're remembering maybe something that they were maybe good at one point, but then they started, living a life that was harmful, to us and themselves. And so sometimes we're sorting through that. So again, that would be about love and remembrance. What did I love about that person before life started messing with them? What do I want to remember about them? There's a lot of stuff I may not want to remember. What do I want to remember? And this is like taking a little bit more control of the process than just letting it control us.
Yeah. It's kind of like grieving. It's almost like grieving the loss of the potential.
Yeah.
It's like if they were just around a little bit longer, maybe we would have been able to turn things around and make things better. And because they're gone, we can't do that. So now there's this lost potential. And I feel like maybe that's what you're kind of getting into there a little bit. And I've seen people sort of grieve that, like, oh, they're gone. That means, we can't bury the hatchet. They're gone. And that means we can't work through our unresolved conflict. And I think that's hard, because then it's kind of like, well, if I had just done this, if I had just resolved this conflict with them beforehand, then they wouldn't have passed on such bad terms with me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, man, absolutely. I can totally resonate with that.
Those are all lies that are going to get in the way of us being able to process that grief.
Outstanding. Yeah, yeah. Cool, man. Awesome. This has been really, really good stuff. I hope everybody here has gotten some solid tips. If you go back, watch it again if you missed some of this stuff, because this is really, really chock full of information here. I'm impressed with as usual with your knowledge about this topic. And how can people get a hold of you? How can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you or get some more of your information on what you do and kind of the things that you offer people?
So we have a free group that I call Grief and Belief, and in that group we talk about grief. We talk about it from a Christian perspective. We also just give people practical tools, like some of the things that I talked about today. So that we do that about twice a month, and so this Friday I'm going to be talking about navigating change, which is a big part of the grieving process. And that group meets on Zoom, so we'll put the link to that in the show notes here or in the chat. But that group can be found on meetup.com /grief and belief. And if people want to reach out to me, my website is called checkyourcompass.org. The word check, the word your, the word compass, all lowercase.org. And what I do is I help people become more mentally fit, and I also help a lot of people with grief and trauma. And I do a lot of intensive counseling where I spend between 3 to 5 hours at a time with somebody. I'll even spend a week with somebody if they need that much time. But grief and trauma can particularly get stuck in the body. And sometimes talk therapy doesn't get at it. A lot of counselors will send me people who are stuck in their grief or in their trauma to just help them get unstuck, because grief and trauma can get stuck in the body, and we need a way to be able to kind of flush that out. And the work that I do, I call it perfect peace, because when we're done working on a memory or we're done working on the grief and trauma, people have this unmistakable perfect peace about them where they're not upset about whatever they brought into the counseling session at all. They're zero disturbance, zero upset about the thing that they walked in with, which often is, at a level of like 8 or 9 out of 10. So it's it's amazing just to be able to sit with people and watch them go through this transformation over the course of a half a day or a day.
Yeah, it feels really good, doesn't it? When you they're with the client, you see them coming in and they're miserable and awful, and then they spend that time with you, and it's like, oh, like everything's so much better now. That's awesome, man. That's fantastic. Cool. So, folks, this guy is giving you a lot. Okay, like, do not be afraid to reach out to him if you are going through grief. If you know somebody who's going through grief, check in with Vinnie. Like, this is where he's at. What he offers is pretty intense, and he's right. Most therapists, myself included, we're doing like 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and then we got to wait a week, to kind of talk about this stuff. And grief doesn't wait, and I think that's where it's important for you to be able to kind of say, okay, yeah, I want to sit down and go over this for a few hours, because we got to dig deep. We got to work through it. So that's wonderful. I'm really glad that you offer this. So, all right, cool, Vinnie. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. This has been great. I really appreciate all the knowledge and information you've shared with us. I think it's been fantastic. In which case, again, guys, checkyourcompass.org. Check it out. Really appreciate your time, and take care. And thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, take care of yourselves. Have an awesome day.